Good morning, 10:15. I hope everyone's well awake. I was listening in on the last session about sleep. It's very relevant and very interesting. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Rail Wellbeing Live. Today, I will be talking about behind the mask, ADHD, anxiety, and the hidden realities of women and girls. And I am Dr. Samantha Hiew, the founder of ADHD Girls, a social impact company with a dual mission to empower neurodivergent women and girls to thrive in society and to elevate neurodiversity understanding through an intersectional and scientific lens. So I'm just going to take us through the talk, and as per the last session, you can put your questions in anytime it arises in your head, any thoughts, any feelings, any kind of thing that you want to say. And then I will address the questions right at the end, okay? So let us start. So a little bit about me. I am a social entrepreneur. Like I said, I founded a company called ADHD Girls, but it was founded when I was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 40. And swiftly identified with being autistic as well. So what I am is both autistic and ADHD with a late diagnosis. So having to contend with the stigma that has prevailed for over a century for labels that have changed a lot since then. And I'll explain a little bit afterwards. So I am a neurodivergent woman and a neurodiversity and women's empowerment champion. A lot of the work I do is about reforming the system and changing the system from the outside. I do a lot of talks, but also public events where I support neurodivergent women. This is something that I held last year in October. It's called a Neurodivergent Phoenix Convention, where we brought women together and we had a mixture of nervous system regulation, some learning, and being together in a community setting. So we also sang together. So it felt like someone was saying, it felt like a choir, and it was very lovely for the women's nervous system. I've also given talks to over 100 plus FTSE companies in many, many more over the last few years on subjects about neurodiversity and neurodivergent women empowerment. So it's been a interesting journey so far. And a lot of what I know about neurodiversity is true science, but also my lived experience of having lived with undiagnosed ADHD and autism for most of my life until 5 years ago. And also being a mother to two neurodivergent children who are wonderful in so many ways. And the combination of being a parent who is neurodivergent, parenting young neurodivergent children is a mind-scrambling experience, but also very rewarding because you deal with a lot of your own stuff whilst you are parenting your child. And a lot of the work I do now is very much learning and healing in parallel with the community. Go to the next slide. So as I said, I do my work in campaigning to humanize neurodiversity by humanizing psychiatry, because so much inside psychiatric systems is about looking at the labels and a set of criteria and seeing how we're going to medicate, support, and treat people. But what I bring is the nuances in each of our presentation and our experience, to see what is below the surface of observable behaviors into the stories of our lives and change how the world understands and supports neurodivergent women. I've written a book called Tip of the ADHD Iceberg, where I dived into the below the surface behaviors. As I said, I ran the Neurodivergent Phoenix Convention, where we combine both science and soul for neurodivergent women. I also ran the first large-scale ADHD women survey when I struggled to receive an autism diagnosis for 7 months and 4 times being denied it because apparently I don't look autistic. I am high achieving and I'm very articulate. So a lot of my challenges were put down to trauma. So I couldn't find anything out there that really adequately explained the autistic ADHD experience. So I ran the research myself, and we had over 400 responses. And then I shared the results in a community event for ADHD women, where over 200 women turned up to listen, and as well as using the foundation, of that research, the results of it to build and with autism and ADHD in women event program in order to train mental health professionals. So my story of hitting my health crash appeared in the Daily Mail health section last year in October, and it is the first time I have openly talked about how I had suffered from the impacts of the side effects of taking ADHD medication whilst being autistic and ADHD. And I'll share more of this. So today I'll be talking a lot about ADHD in women, but I also want to bring to light how so many of us who are diagnosed later in life are also autistic. So I want to bring to light the rise of ADHD and what this means for so many of us. How nature and nurture, the stories of our lives, play such a big role in how we show up and our mental and physical health conditions that underlie behind the mask. And what you see is very rarely what is occurring underneath. And I want to go really big on hormones and perimenopause, because this is my life stage and also the life stage of so many neurodivergent women, given the fact that neurodivergent women tend to experience hormonal shifts and fluctuations in perimenopause much earlier than the neurotypical women population. In fact, so many of us can experience symptoms of perimenopause from mid-30s onwards. And I'm 45 now, so it feels like on average, they say the age where perimenopause should start is 45 for neurotypical women. But actually, I feel like I've already been going through it for the last 8 years. And that comes with rethinking how we work and how we see success. And also, in the end, what we need to advocate for ourselves. And I'll share some resources as well. So let's start. So ADHD in women is a hidden epidemic in the sense that we have so many cases in the last few years. And in fact, women aged 23 to 49 years old make up the largest group of people who are seeking ADHD diagnosis, and it's causing a major bottleneck in the NHS and the UK, also worldwide. So ADHD is very much stigmatized as a male condition, and as a result of that, we have been compared to standards and male diagnostic criteria, where there are very little female representation. But since that massive drive in diagnosis and people looking for one, there has been more research being done in increasing female-specific diagnostic rating scales, where people are creating even masking scales of what perhaps we can the type of questions we can ask to get to the answers behind the mask. So in 2019 to 2021, there has been a 3,200% increase in women who took online tests for ADHD. So what is going on here? Okay, so this is the picture that started everything when I shared it in the community talk. This is the female ADHD iceberg. And before I created this, I was seeing so many ADHD icebergs, but it didn't really fully encapsulate our experience. And in fact, I got really wary of people talking about female ADHD as though we were all inattentive, anxious, and depressed people pleasers. There was so much that underlie our story, and also the cause of it, is hormonal impact, makes a massive difference in the ADHD presentation across life stages, and the presentation changes across different hormonal stage, and so half the time what we're dealing with is the gender role in society. And for a really long time, I played that role, doing the motherhood, the parenting, the pregnancy, breastfeeding, and actually staying out of work. In fact, actually, yesterday, I spent half of the day creating almost a vignette, a story of what happened 10 years ago, the 2016 trend that you see on social media. And in that 2016 trend, I put in what happened in 2016 when, I was actually fresh pushed out of work for being a first time mum, and went back to negotiate flexible working, but got denied it and was told by my employer that if you quietly go and don't tell anyone about this and say that it was your choice to resign, then you don't have to pay back what we paid you for your maternity leave. And I was young. I consider myself quite young then, although I was actually in my 30s. And I just listened, and I did what he said. And then it felt like a huge betrayal because, you pour your entire being into work, and then people, you can so easily just be dispensable when life situations doesn't work for them. But what no one really talked about then was that the post pregnancy and post childbirth hormonal crash that ensued really landed me into prolonged postnatal anxiety, OCD, and depression. And that created this feeling that I was all I had. My baby only had me. And if I wasn't there for her, then she would have nothing and I would have nothing. And it made it very difficult to go back to work full time. So I dedicated a good part of the few years after she was born to be with her. But that was a recipe for an existential crisis, because inside a woman, there is so much more than caregiving. We want to give the care to our children, our offsprings, but we also have a piece of ourselves, that is different, that is separate to being a mother. There is the woman, the mission, the work that you want to do as well, but somehow you land in a space where you feel like you have to choose. And it's not so much just the outside influence as well, it's the inside. It's how hormones interact with ADHD to make it quite difficult for someone to get out of themselves. Because a lot of what the community has said is that they have felt like they've been in a mental prison, for so long, and getting the answer of why that is, being diagnosed with ADHD was the key to unlock it, but then further understanding the co-occurring conditions and what is going on in your lives and really help you really understand your motivation, your patterns of behavior and what underlie that. That is completely life-changing. So this is the book I wrote to explain the ADHD experience with a lot of emphasis on women. So through a woman's lens, let's talk about the science. I know you've had a lot of time listening to sleep science, and I love that because sleep makes such a big part of our well-being. But in an ADHD nervous system, it is different. And there's a dysregulation in circadian rhythm, which is more biological. But I want to talk about the neurobiology, what constitute the characterization of ADHD. So over the last decades, researchers have been trying to redefine what ADHD means. In 2013, the criteria to diagnose ADHD has loosened, where they have lowered the threshold, for both ADHD and autism, and as a result, more people who were considered not on a severe spectrum were also able to be diagnosed with ADHD. So there is the behavioral self-regulation, executive functioning challenges that they believe people with ADHD have. And that's largely governed by the prefrontal cortex, which is your frontal lobe, the most advanced, supposedly most advanced, system in the mammalian brain. And this is the part that develops very gradually and doesn't fully mature in the ADHD brain until at least the age of 35 to 40. And as a result, over time, if you start a person from childhood, through to adolescence to adulthood, the quality of the prefrontal cortex that you get in adulthood is very much determined, especially by what happens during adolescence, when there is a huge amount of pruning that happens in the brain during that time. But they believe that in a neurodivergent brain with ADHD and mental health challenges, there is less pruning involved and more noise. And also if you think of an adolescent, a teenage person, their dopamine reward circuit comes online, around the age of 13, 14, and they're seeking novelty and sensation, right? And so with ADHD, they say there is a dysregulation in dopamine and norepinephrine levels where there is an imbalance. And often a teenage person would be looking for something, a drug of choice, in order to satiate, this feeling of having low frustration tolerance, or actually feeling like you need something to come to balance. And so the prefrontal cortex governs the brain's control center, the center that determines how well you regulate the day-to-day tasks, like getting out on time, time management, organization, delegating, how you see yourself, metacognition, how you regulate your emotions. And when there is challenge around the prefrontal cortex maturation, then there is less of a control in those areas that I mentioned. Although with women, they do believe that women with ADHD tend to have better executive function control than men with ADHD, although that's a largely overgeneralized thing. So there is also inattention, the distractibility that with ADHD. But the flip side of that is hyperfocus. When you're so interested in something that you drop everything else, you have this attention tunnel, everything gets sucked into this tunnel and you're focused on it, and that if anyone tries to distract you whilst you're focused on this thing, it feels like someone's poured a bucket of water into your face when you're trying to have a massage, and it's very dysregulating. So there's hyperactivity. There is, and we know this, but hyperactivity in women doesn't look like what you expect. It's not like Tigger bouncing up and down. Many women have learned to hide this. We are very good at reading social cues, perhaps understanding what we want, what people expect us to be. So hyperactivity gets internalized quite early on, especially with messages that keep coming when you're younger about how you can't just sit still or concentrate, Then this gets internalized in the brain with lots of hyper chatter and hyper talkative. That's how some ADHD women tend to express their hyperactivity, but also hyperreactive. There's lots of really interesting hyper things. Emotional dysregulation, although I would caveat this by saying that always has a trigger. There's something or someone may cause dysregulation where we go from 0 to 100. And it is very different to bipolar, where it's more episodic. Emotional dysregulation, right, as a characteristic, can also be governed, influenced by hormones. The change of hormones throughout the month or at the life stage that you're at. Impulsivity in women can look like shopping, impulsive compulsion for working, and there is a lot that we do to self-medicate before we got diagnosed and even after we get diagnosed. So self-medication is a way to deal with the imbalance in the neurotransmitter levels to achieve a state of balance, as I mentioned before. So impulsivity can be responsible for our drug of choice when we were flying under the radar. And excessive mind wandering, it's when spontaneous thoughts can pop in your mind at any time, especially while someone's talking. And if they're not holding your attention, you're off somewhere, and the flip side of that is that excessive mind wandering can also lead to spontaneous creative thoughts. And they believe that ADHDers are very creative, where the reason for that mind wandering is because the default mode network, part of the brain, which is a state of your imagination and how you see yourself, your sense of self, that is switched on at the same time around the task positive network that lights up when you're supposed to focus and do the thing. So when you have that competition with something that's always calling your attention, then it is harder to focus at the task at hand if you are not interested in it. But because of that also is that you're more likely to think about situations, solutions that people don't often think about. And we are very much out of the box thinkers. There's no box to fit us. We are just different to everyone. So the understanding of ADHD has evolved in the last 5 years, actually massively. So where we thought of ADHD as a brain condition, is quite outdated now, with the mind, body, and I add relational experience of the neurodivergent experience. So I talked to you about the brain, but a lot of what we experience with ADHD begins in the body, and it begins inside our cells. And inside our cells, there's DNA that we inherit from our parents. And this DNA encode for gene variants that can cause little differences across all your major organ systems in the body. And in fact, some of the gene variants that they found actually codes to influence up to 54 different tissue types in the body. And so ADHD is a whole life and whole person condition because it affects the tissues and cells in your body to impact the biochemical pathways, whether that's energy production, detoxification, the rise of inflammation, immune conditions, what happens in the brain where the circuitries just work differently. And also, when you take a brain and body with ADHD into the world, it very much matters how they were preconditioned, the nurture that they had that formed the belief in themselves, and how they then form relationships. Many neurodivergents with ADHD have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where we feel rejection, feedback, or criticism in our body, and it's just really painful. And it is, it can cause quite serious mental health conditions. So I talked to you about me being ADHD, which is a combination of autistic and ADHD. There's also the rise of mixed diagnosis, right, in the world. So over the last few years, there's been lots of articles that came out to try and answer this. There is the Guardian article that talk about the rise of ADHD. They have an ADHD section in the newspapers. What is causing the rocketing rates of this life-changing diagnosis? So there is the loosening of the criteria, but there is also the no one knows what ADHD truly look like, and they're still assessing both ADHD and autism separately when ADHD is a completely different neurotype. And to complicate matters, there was a new book that came out last year, straight after I created that ADHD in Women's event. This book by Professor Gina Rippin was published in that she had found gender differences in autism, where previously she had thought there is no gender differences in our brains, between men and women. But they have found that autistic girls are more wired to look for social connection, which goes against everything we know about autism, because so much that we know about autism is described based on the typical autistic male presentation, the Sheldon, the Rain Man, but we don't look anything like that. And if we don't look anything like that, we don't get found. But and then in the summer of last year, a new autism study came out that uncovers at least 4 different subtypes of autism. And this further diversifies the type of cases that we get later in life, when people get diagnosed. So it's a very interesting journey so far. And so I want to reiterate how a neurodivergent woman, how she presents, is both nature and nurture that shapes how the symptoms and the traits evolve through time. We know already from what I said, and you probably already know if you're logged into this call, that the neurobiology and the hormonal impact, the neuroendocrine connection very much determines the manifestation of ADHD. And I'll go into this a bit deeper in a bit. So there is innate sex differences, but it's also the woman's role in society across ages and stages. And I talk a lot about the woman's journey, the girl and women's journey. And part of my own recovery and healing is to help my own daughter, who is now 11, going on to 12 this year, reframe how she sees herself. Because for a really long time, I was ascribing to the role of a woman too much. In fact, I kind of went overboard and became a martyr. And no one likes a martyr, except people who need things from us. A martyr parent actually makes a parent that makes her children quite uncomfortable, because if you see yourself as the source of everything in life, and you give and give and give, then you resent others as well. You are also snappy, you're angry, how no one really seems to understand or help you in return, and that role isn't a good one, isn't a good role model to raise our future generations with, because then my daughter was starting to do as I do, and I was like, no, we need to stop now, and I had the blessings of perimenopause where the declining sex hormones just won't let me mask, it won't let me filter, and actually it gave me very little energy left, after my health crash, in order to keep giving relentlessly. So by modeling a new way of being, she's also changing, she's looking up to me, and it is really rewarding. It is a very, very big part of the work of being a parent, to ensure that your own conditioning doesn't project onto your own daughter or your own child. But it's also great for your own growth, to move on to the next stage, to be more responsible for ourselves, and actually be better at creating boundaries to support your own life going forward, and your own health. So I also want to allude to that there is health challenges that come from biology and hyperfunctioning and the hypervigilance. We talked about anxiety. So this is quite a big part of the neurodivergent women experience. So many neurodivergent women get diagnosed with anxiety first, or depression, before they find ADHD or autism. There's some scientific reasoning behind anxiety. Your default mode network is more active, but when it is more active is during the part where estrogen and progesterone starts to go down, in your cycle or in your life stage, where I'll talk about this more with hormones. So societal roles that shape our personas and our masks. So let's not pretend it's all biology, okay? And it's interesting because when I showed this graphic, I think what is more appropriate is that this is autism in women, autism in men, but some men may relate more with the feminine issues of masking, and some women might relate to the masculine issues of masking. So there are basically social rules that are created to suit the dominant culture in society. The dominant culture being people who do not have mental health challenges, who are born with neurodevelopmental on the neurodevelopmental timeline, and everyone else who society favors. So those who do not fit that dominant culture tend to know that quite early in life, especially if you fall under what they call high functioning. which isn't a great term, especially for people who are given that label, high functioning autism or ADHD. Then you are expected to be okay in all social situations to perform. But then the degree of masking and paddling, rigorously underneath the surface, that no one sees, is part of the problem, that lead to mental health challenges later in life. So I want to highlight how masking, if you look behind the mask, at what it is doing to your physical health and your mental health, we can only speculate, because the rise of physical co-occurring conditions that neurodivergence with ADHD and autism tend to have. And this is very well known. This is a research that I've done, the lived experience research, where we found lots of co-occurring physical health conditions like chronic fatigue, pain conditions, digestive issues, immune and autoimmune disorders, sleep disorders, very relevant, sensory and nervous system dysregulation. So we have this sensory and nervous system dysregulation is the largest physical health condition that people tend to, neurodivergent women, ADHD women, tend to report. This is largely to do with all the biochemical changes that's happening in our body and more that ensue every month as our hormones shift, fluctuates in our biology. Okay, so there are all these co-occurring mental health conditions as well that ADHD women tend to report: anxiety, depression that we know, panic, CPTSD. They're all biochemical reasons that underlie it, that isn't really discussed when you go to a psychiatric appointment. And as a result, people get treated with medications that actually put a band-aid on the problem, but doesn't actually fully solve the issue. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to say that if you mask, okay, we already know that there's physical and mental health conditions that can arise from that. But also, when we experience the world in all our sensitivities, neurodivergents have inherited more of that sensitivity due to the gene variants, that give rise to the different biochemical pathways. But we also see more, feel more, and hear more. Our body is porous to the world. We are emotionally, hormonally, sensorily, and relationally very in tune. We see more, and when you see more, you will have to mask more if you want to keep relationships, because imagine saying everything that you've noticed about people. You won't be having any relationships. And then trauma that comes from this suppression, if you hold it in, if you mask, the trauma from this will arise in the body. And so I love this research where they showed the heat map of the body when a person experienced certain emotions like anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, neutral, anxiety, love, depression, contempt, pride, shame, and envy. So if the emotions are being felt in certain parts of your body, what happens when you suppress them? Do they get embedded in that part of the body as stuck points? And you tend to feel that more, whilst you're healing, but also when hormones, come into the picture and things change in your body. So I just want to share a little bit about my own journey with healing and ADHD. So this picture was taken in a talk that I gave in Farringdon on International Women's Day. And I was 2 years into being medicated for ADHD. It was a time when I was going through separation and co-parenting, and also maintaining a new relationship. And what happened then was I was taking on the responsibility for ending my marriage and making sure that, my co-parent had everything. But actually no one was asking me if I needed anything. And there was the stress of juggling schedules, of trying to make sure I eat well. And at the time, I started having side effects from medication. And that the advice that, women with ADHD could do well with having 2 doses of medication, where a lot of people say that when they approach the week before their menstrual cycle, they tend to not feel their medication working. And because of that, you have to increase the dosage. So I did that for 2 years. And then when you layer on life stress, I was having lots of symptoms. Very quickly, I had insomnia, restless leg syndrome, brain fog, air hunger. Actually, for a really long time, I couldn't breathe very well. And that exacerbated during this very busy month, during Neurodiversity Celebration Week and International Women's Day, the month of March, which is approaching. So then, whilst I was giving a talk, all of a sudden I stopped breathing and I panicked when I just realized how I wasn't breathing. And so if I wasn't breathing, how was I going to talk? So I realized that you can actually talk, and I learned to do that. I lived with air hunger for the better part of 2 years before I eventually found out what it is, and I started to heal my body. There was definitely the impact of hormones, which, led me to then look into getting hormonal replacement therapy to support my health. But then that also came with some complication when it interacted with ADHD medication. So I have to optimize the medication, the hormones, and then the supplementation, because neurodivergent women neurodivergents with ADHD tend to have micronutrient deficiencies, but also the life stage of perimenopause can cause deficiencies in B12, vitamin D, and a few more. But then what I want to highlight is that the iron deficiency, and you get iron deficiency anyway after you give birth. But with the hormonal changes and the stress, that further exacerbated the iron deficiency. So it was only this, like 2 months ago, that I found out I was severely low on serum ferritin. With that, I started iron supplements, which was interesting. The air hunger was gone, but then the digestive issue starts. So it's really interesting because they've said that neurodivergent women tend to have more symptoms that happen in more organ systems than those who are not neurodivergent. So I wanted to show you the hormone, the hormonal changes that are happening throughout the month. You might have seen this, estrogen and progesterone. And so towards ovulation, estrogen increases, progesterone is still at low level, but it gradually increases. But this part, people have said that the dual nature of estrogen, when it goes up, we tend to be more impulsive. When it goes down, we tend to experience low mood. But progesterone-wise, losing progesterone is part of the challenge for so many neurodivergent women, but not just progesterone that you take from contraceptive pills, but it's a naturally occurring progesterone, which can calm our nervous system because it comes with GABA, and it helps insulin production, and also it's anti-anxiety. So when we have this period stuff like straight after ovulation, where estrogen goes down and progesterone is quite low, and then also towards our menstrual cycle, our menstruation, when progesterone and estrogen both decrease, these are the time when women tend to experience premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is to do with our body not liking the extreme change that's happening with our hormones, because when the hormones fluctuate, that tend to also impact things like mast cell activation and histamine production. So at no better time than perimenopause to find this out, because this is when your estrogen levels can fluctuate up and down whilst your progesterone is lowered, very much so. So this is a time that neurodivergent women tend to experience, a time when they don't know who they are anymore, and they feel anxious for reasons that they don't understand. So And there are so many other points where we were not told that this really, really matters. During puberty, where estrogen starts ballooning, this is a very important part of a girl with ADHD's development. Recently, my daughter, who was diagnosed with ADHD, she was sent to the A&E because I gave her chocolate cake and chicken broth on Boxing Day. And so on Boxing Day, we found ourselves in A&E, and she had a histamine flare where you could see like she got hives, and then she struggled to breathe. She's my daughter. And what was going on was she's going through puberty right now. At the age of 11, estrogen is ballooning in her nervous system. And if her body isn't clearing estrogen, estrogen tends to then increase to a level so high that it activates mast cells to release histamines. And this histamine starts to flare, and it affects everything. Because histamine in the lungs can cause trouble with breathing. Histamine, on the skin can cause hives. Histamine on the nose can cause like overproduction of sinuses. So this is a very important point to actually be aware and be mindful of what we can do to support girls. But also the part during pregnancy, women tend to say they feel better, because all the sex hormones start to increase, but then we get other issues, But then it's straight after pregnancy is when the dive occurs, and this can cause postnatal anxiety and depression. And if you're breastfeeding, it gradually normals out. And during perimenopause, this is what is going on. You are dealing with real decrease in the sex hormones that is causing mental health, challenges, physical health challenges that we need to do more research on. And then post-menopause, that level starts to like just normalize, but it's at a lower level. So they do say that it is really good if we were to consider hormonal replacement therapy to do this before, women actually enter menopause, because then you have more of a chance to support your brain and body systems. Because and also said before, hormonal shifts and sensitivities can really magnify across ages and life demands as well. So I want to go through this quickly because I want to leave time for questions. So neurodivergence in women and anxiety is very much situationally dependent. So I talked to you about genes and how that can impact both neurotransmitters and the hormones, that the way they are produced, but also the way they are cleared. So you can't have too much either. When you have estrogen dominance or hormonal sensitivity, like progesterone sensitivity, that can cause issues when your nervous system is trying to figure out where it is, and there's not enough calming in the system, and that causes anxiety. But the shifts, the transitions that happen inside your cycle and during life stage also massively cause this difference. Overactive default mode network, as I mentioned, co-occurring conditions, lifestyle habits, and whether you feel safe in your life. So the relationships that you have in your circle. So I really want to, drive home how important it is to align with what nature intended. And the world of work has been created in a way that doesn't fully support a woman's menstrual cycle. How we are different. Every phase gives you a different way of being, and we have to align to it. It's when we don't align to it and do the necessary things that each phase is asking of us, that's when burnout, dysregulation happens. So inside a menstrual cycle, there is the spring, summer, autumn, and winter months. Sorry. Inside a menstrual cycle, there's 4 different phases, but also inside your life, there are certain parts of your life that are actually better at doing certain things, and we need to listen to what nature intended. So with productivity, is there another way? How about energy-based productivity? That is very much different to the traditional world of work, looking at time-based productivity, bums on seats, 9 to 5, except that we don't work 9 to 5. Energy-based productivity is very much aligned with the neurodivergent nervous system, and also the women's nervous system, where the neurodivergent brains are effective for certain times of the day or certain times of the month, We should always schedule recovery time before we eventually shut down, and have workflow that minimizes overwhelmed. Okay, so this is my last slide. So to advocate for yourself, really truly get to know your needs, understand your body, your mind, and how you relate. And I can't stress this enough, track your cycle. And if you're taking any other medication, track your cycle along with how you feel with these medications, because that will tell you everything. Because what tends to happen with neurodivergent women is we take a medication to solve one problem, but then something else crops up because that medication causes issues in other areas. An example of this is supplementing with iron has given me the ability to breathe again, but it actually causes like digestive issues for me. So I have to pace myself and take it at different times. Set boundaries, say no, protect recovery time, understand what helps you, and to have clear expectation from others as well. Because when we know what others are expecting of us, there's less anxiety. We don't need to mask as much. Very clear and direct communication is very aligned with the neurodivergent nervous system. So we don't need to think for you. What we don't communicate, someone else has to think for us. And harness your strength that's more aligned to what you're great at, your skills, and also your energy levels. And create buffer time for recovery so you don't burn out. And to build supportive network, great to have a community here today. So this is it. This is me, and I have some time left for questions. It's my training program for autism and ADHD in women that I mentioned. You can scan the QR code here to access that. And my book, Tip of the ADHD Iceberg. Thank you very much. So time for questions. So someone says here, my sister-in-law thinks my niece has ADHD and autism. She is 15 because of school refusal and will only eat certain foods. However, she can switch on and off dependent on the situation. Say she doesn't like people, loud noises, or crowded spaces, but is happy on her own terms to go out with friends from school, but says she can't go to school because of the same people and will go to concerts and shows. Okay. So, is there a question? So, I guess it does show that she's potentially ADHD. What I see more here, yes, is potentially autistic. Can't see the ADHD yet, but yeah, there is a huge drive for autonomy for someone who is autistic and ADHD, and if they're avoiding situation with certain people, there is a chance that they don't feel comfortable with that person, and because what I said about autistic girls being wired to mask and to look for social rewards, so it is really important to them that people like them. So another question, do people without ADHD mask? Yes. I find I mask a lot at work and I'm absolutely exhausted after a day at the office, but don't have any formal diagnosis. It's hard to tell what's related to my anxiety and depression and what might be an ADHD symptom. So in order to be diagnosed with ADHD, you have to have developed some traits before the age of 12. And also notice how you are like during periods of severe, like kind of life transitions. Are you anxious then, or during the month, in your menstrual cycle? Notice how you feel. Okay. I have always suspected I have ADHD, female, 33 years old, but wouldn't know where to start with getting a test or diagnosis. The older I get, the more exhausting it seems to be to mask. Yes, the older you get, the more your sex hormones won't let you, because we go through massive neuroendocrine remodeling, and with that remodeling comes the sex hormones oscillating or fluctuating. And with that, when estrogen starts to go down, because estrogen is the Beyonce hormones and is very responsible for us being social and verbally articulate. So when that goes down, then we also don't, we find it harder to mask. But a really good place to start looking is like look up the Diva questionnaire. There is a free version. You can look at what the rating scale says, because you can also do the questions, the pre-assessment rating for ADHD, but that is highly gender biased. So you have to look beyond the questions, if that makes sense. But do get in touch. There is a resource on my website. that talks about this. So why does ADHD in women show up or become so hard during menopause? Yeah, so I've been talking about hormones a lot. During menopause, your estrogen level drops. There is a curve I showed, when it really matters for women and neurodivergent women, because estrogen indirectly regulates dopamine that helps us, feel motivated, but it also regulates serotonin. So when estrogen starts to dive, serotonin also dives, and acetylcholine, which helps our executive functioning. So during menopause, your estrogen has gone down really low, but also your progesterone. If you're not on HRT, or if you're on HRT but the HRT doesn't suit, you can find it harder to feel calm within yourself. And that calming is what we need, but we tend to lose it as we get older. So my partner is in perimenopause and has ADHD. How's the best way to approach her when she is stressed? Maybe help her not be stressed, because a lot of the time when we are stressed, we're feeling some demands in our lives, or maybe we can wake up one day and we're like, we didn't sleep well, because when we lose progesterone, sleep often goes, and that really affects your circadian rhythm. You don't sleep, and when you don't sleep, your brain doesn't go through that car wash thing that happens, where you kind of, reset your system. And there's higher inflammation, higher brain fog. I do advise a more functional look at perimenopause, and if needed, medication, like non-stimulants or stimulants. But it really needs to suit her personal biology. I would say like nervous system regulation, but actually don't suggest it in a way that you're implying that she's stressed, because she's likely more touchy then. So maybe give her some resources. My book really helps. It's my exploration into ADHD. I also run an ADHD women program, which is starting in February. Okay, so I feel like there is a lot of question. All right, I feel like I put on a personality for work that is so ingrained, I can't get rid of it. Yet I hate that personality. Every interaction I have with people is painful, and I prefer not to be at work anymore. Work is getting harder and harder the older I get. I can't think straight. I thought I had dementia. I'm on HRT, but while it's helped, I still feel like I'm sinking. I'm waiting for an ADHD diagnosis. Is this normal for someone with ADHD? Very normal. Very, 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 very normal. So when you've masked so long, that mask becomes you. Doesn't mean that you like it, but it's become so natural for you to do it. And so many of us think the answer is that we don't see people. We hide. We don't work with people, but that's not realistic. We do need to work with people, but part of this journey is about actually just coming back to yourself, being authentic. Because I didn't mention here, but there is a science that underlies masking. When you mask, your brain is scanning for threats, for differences in cues, differences in verbal, tone, voice. And if people, you feel like you aren't doing enough, to appease people, then that can cause stress on you, because your frontal lobe is working overtime to figure out what is the rational thing to do here to get me a place to belong. And, that uses a lot of brain energy, brain energy that is used to cause exhaustion at the end of the day, right? And I always believe to go into healing from the inside out. I look into holistic functional medicine, but also I'm on a low dose of stimulants to support myself. And it's an ongoing journey. I'm also on HRT. It's holistic. Is there any benefit to seeking a diagnosis if you can mostly get along fine in day-to-day life? Some people don't want to, but some people want it to have the validation. But that also depends where you're getting that validation from. A very big incentive of getting a diagnosis is the treatment, the medication. But I would really kind of put that in red label, because the medication needs to come with the skills to manage the pills. So have you got any advice about parenting as neurodivergent parent? I do get overwhelmed easily. I find that my son sometimes looks at me after saying something to check that I'm not having an overwhelmed reaction. We have a lovely relationship, but I feel so guilty. So yeah, this is when I said that you have like such spidey senses and you can see things, but you don't say it, right? I hear you. I have been there. I am still there sometimes checking myself. But a really big part of this is putting on your own oxygen mask, really get to know your body and your mind, really get to understand what helps you feel at peace, what helps you regulate your nervous system, and say no to things that don't align to you, and work on your inner child. That is very, very deep work. It takes time, but eventually, over time, you're truer to yourself, you communicate who you are, you work on yourself, you're compassionate to your children. And eventually, it's going to be easier. I'm not saying it's perfect, it does get easier. Do you have any tips for supporting a woman and girl with anxiety, particularly if they are masking and saying they're okay? I would go into the root of what caused them anxious. Sometimes we're anxious because we feel like we the version of us that is real isn't the version that a certain situation calls for. And I feel like in order for us to have to measure up, we need to mask. Also, there's a lot you can do with supplementations to reduce anxiety. There's L-theanine, which supports anxiety. But a woman who is feeling anxious, if you're in perimenopause, I would suggest, going on progesterone to support you, but also nervous system regulation. You're doing what you love, but also breath work, go for walks in nature. Nature always helps. What are your key recommendations for supporting team members with ADHD? This is a really big one. I actually deliver entire talks on this. Reasonable workplace adjustments that are tailored to what they need and what neurodivergents find more helpful, even more helpful than assistive technology, though assistive technology is very helpful, is to understand different ways of working. I alluded just now to energy-based productivity. And the reason for that is because everyone has different productivity block. But if you force an ADHD to sit down and do something when they just can't light up, it's like trying to draw blood out of a stone. And it's very frustrating for the ADHD as well. Like try and align to their interest-based nervous system, where if they're interested in something enough, they would do it. And what motivates an ADHD is interest, passion, urgency, novelty. I forgot to see now. It'll come back to me. How can I respond to people that say things like, well, everyone has a bit of ADHD, or it's a new condition for young people. I feel dismissed by them, but don't feel like anything I say will change their mind. So those with ADHD often has more than focus issues. In this book, it talks about all the gene variants that can eventually give rise to all the physical health conditions, and mental health conditions are very, very much a part of it. So load them with the science. It's so great to be here with you all, and really lovely.